Hi everyone, I'm coming back at you with a quick Q&A this summer. This is a question that actually was lifted up in a comment in my Facebook group, and I thought it would be another great one for us to explore for a few minutes together. So you can see it here on the screen. How might key concepts have an interconnection among standards and practices? And this is an important question. Sometimes these things can feel at odds with one another, but they certainly don't need to. While there are many ways we could address this question, I want to lift up just one way that many teams I'm working with find helpful to think through these kind of three pieces. So we have standards, we have practices, and key concepts. So your standards can often be your starting place. They don't have to be your stopping place. You don't need to feel like standards are constricting in any way. They're just saying, for sure, you're going to explore these standards with children. Doesn't mean you can't also go beyond it. It also can be helpful to think of standards as a way to ensure equity and access, which I hope are a part of all of our values. So sometimes standards are kind of given a bad rap. They're seen in a negative light, and I don't think they need to be, as long as they're kept in their place, as long as they're not made the be all end all, that it's not all about standardized testing. That could be another video for another conversation. But if you keep them in their place, they can be really helpful. We can know all third graders explored this, all sixth graders explored this, right? There's that equity and access lens, which is so, so important. So that would be your standards. So maybe you have standards, for example, around weather, natural hazards. Maybe you teach third grade, and those are some of the science standards you have. You're going to want to explore that information with children in your care. Where do concepts come in then? Well, your concepts would be taking something like weather, natural hazards, and thinking, so what? What do I want children to understand about these things? And that could often lead to big concepts. If you work within the IB, you know that in the IB-PYP, there's particular key concepts that have already been identified. So you could look at that list and think, what is this really about? Yes, it's about weather, but it's not just about that topic. We're learning a bigger understanding for life. And so I often lift up this example because I think it's a nice, clear one. When I was working with a third grade team, they were doing this exact work, and they thought through, well, okay, if we have weather, natural hazards, let's actually read the standard. What does it say? And it was about noticing patterns in weather. Well, then what do we really want children to understand? Well, that there's patterns in life, in the world, and that if we notice these patterns, we can make predictions, right? That's what meteorologists do. But we don't only do that with weather. They started looking at their other standards, and they noticed they had math standards, right? Around addition, subtraction, multiplication. Can children notice patterns, right? To form theories. Oh, so we do that as mathematicians, we do that as meteorologists. Then they started looking at their literacy standards. They had standards around analysis of literary elements like theme, characters. Oh, so we notice patterns in characters, for example, to make predictions. Something big their third graders would be working on would be making predictions and forming theories about characters, about the theme. So with all of that then, their key concepts they pulled out were around connection, causation, change, right? And from that, they were able to form big ideas and big questions to explore this idea that people form theories and make predictions based on patterns, right? People use patterns to form theories and make predictions. So it wasn't any longer the weather unit. That would be very topical. Instead, now it was about the concepts of patterns, predictions, change, causation, right? And then our practices, finally. So we were thinking about key concepts, standards, practices. How do they all interconnect? The practices would be more your how. How do you go about exploring this with children, with students? And so you're kind of thinking about the pedagogies that you use, right? So we're thinking with pedagogy in mind, we're thinking Do I use a workshop approach, for example? Many schools I'm working with, we pull on a research-based workshop approach, not just for reading and writing, but math workshop, studio workshop, and art and music, as well, along with reading and writing workshops. So that could be the pedagogical approach that you take. In the early years, we're often looking at things inspired by a Reggio Emilia approach. That would be your practices. How do you go about learning and teaching in your environment? What are your rituals, your routines? How do you spend your minutes? What teaching methods do you use? So when we're exploring patterns and predictions with characters, with numbers, with weather, how do we go about doing that would be your practices.